to them. And we felt that this was actually a really great opportunity for us to bridge, the existing gaps by leveraging a call center infrastructure where people are able to, access this range of services. So that's one way that we've been able to, leverage technology and using simple and accessible technologies, because that is also really important. Knowing fully well that a lot of times women in rural communities who do not have access to smartphones are, disproportionately affected. The other bit, of our effort in terms of leveraging technology has to do with integrating both prevention and response mechanism. I'm sure that we are all aware of the increasing spate of sexual and gender-based violence in spaces characterized by power asymmetry. And when we talk about the spaces, we talk about spaces like workplaces, we talk about spaces like even churches, we talk about places like environments of learning. And what this implies is that people would naturally be attuned to keeping quiet when things like this happen because of the power imbalance, because of the power dynamics. So we thought about leveraging technology in a way that shows solidarity to survivors, in a way that shows that when people come forward to report cases, they are not alone. And we see that, technology in itself can be used to build that community, to build that movement. So that's one way that we've been able to leverage technology to combat sexual and gender-based violence. Today in Nigeria, I would say that Gender Mobile actually provided the leadership that launched the first feature-rich mobile app specific to campus communities. When you hear that over 70% of a particular demographic group experience sexual and gender-based violence, I'm sure that we all, would come to terms with the fact that at that point, a state of emergency needs to be declared, and that is actually an epidemic proportion. And this has been largely attributed to lack of policies and also lack of reporting channels and lack of institutional accountability. So when we take these three together, we've been able to deploy technology to foster institutional accountability. And that even starts from people reporting cases and seeing that institutions are demonstrating the requisite courage, to process those cases that have been reported in a timely manner. There is this popular saying that justice delayed is justice denied. When people see that when they report cases, institutions are not living up to expectation, I think there's a way that dampens the morale of whoever is reporting or whoever has experienced such pattern of abuse. And I also think that another, bit to even institutional accountability is institutions themselves being transparent about cases that are reported. We've been able to leverage technology in that regard. When people report cases, they are able to track the cases based on policy guidelines. If I report a case of sexual harassment and my institutional policy provides that my institution has to determine that case within 30 working days, my institution owes me that duty through the platform that I've reported that case to give me updates on, the ongoing process on the determination of that case. Third is that in terms of institutional accountability, we've also been able to create a platform through technology or through leveraging technology that encourages institutions to center the experiences, the inputs, the leadership, the priorities of people who are directly affected by patterns of sexual harassment or sexual and gender-based violence in this spaces through what we call a climate survey. A lot of times we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but how does this meaningfully translate into tangible results? And we need to think about the diverse communities where we all program. We need to think of ways to capture, their experiences, and that we've been able to do leveraging technology, because we also understand the role of intersectionality when it comes to the experiences that people have, of sexual and gender-based violence. The other bit to this is creating a platform still within the space where people can report with the highest degree of confidentiality. And that's where, having a matching folder also comes in, where people understand that when people, when people perpetrate sexual and gender-based violence, chances are that they are repeat offenders. And the reason why we have a growing population of repeat offenders is because institutions are not holding people to account. So, but when a survivor sees that there is someone who has perpetrated this pattern of sexual harassment and sees that there's a channel where I can be matched with another person who has experienced sexual harassment from that same repeat offenders. That way, there is solidarity. That way, I have enough courage to come forward to report this case because I know there's someone else who also has a similar case against the same perpetrator. I think the other bit for me also is access to resources. We've been able to leverage technology to create a platform where people who experience sexual harassment or sexual and gender-based violence are able to hold respectful and nuanced conversations, catalyze the power of solidarity in virtual safe spaces, because we always say that safe spaces are not in physical structures, but they are in human beings. They are in the environment where people are able to sanction patterns or behavioral patterns that promote or enable sexual and gender-based violence to thrive. The other bit where I would say we've also been able to, leverage technology is also creating, a platform where we are democratizing access to policies. Sometimes policies exist, sometimes legal framework exists, but people are not aware that they exist also because a lot of those frameworks are not, given the kind of publicity that they should be given. A lot of times people are not able to access it in a way that is simple. So with these platforms, we are promoting preventative education also because we understand that there is a role of education and information in transforming behaviors or reforming behaviors and attitude towards sexual and gender-based violence. So I would say that there is a lot of ways that we've leveraged technology so far, but I would just also keep it at this in the interest of brevity so that we can move on to, other areas that I would like to touch in the course of this webinar. Thank you very much.
Well delivered. Thank you so much, Amaomi. I heard so much coming out of your discussions. There were key points that I highlighted, and that one of them is the existing gap that is clearly identified within issues of leveraging technology, and the amazing work that Gender Mobile is doing came out strongly in your discussion. Well done to you and your team. The feature rich, creating an app where it's easy for students of tertiary institutions to report these cases is an amazing innovation that we are grateful to have actors like you within the space. I would kindly request that maybe at some point in your discussion, you could share with us some of the information on how our participating audience can access these call centers or can share this information to people who may need this information, but specifically on how, the general public can access the services that Gender Mobile is creating within tertiary institutions. Also, you said something very that stood out for me, which is around power dynamics that the first speaker talked about, that often pushes women to specific roles, leaving out women to, reach out to specific easy roles and not diving into roles like technology and innovation. And just seeing that more women are coming out to explore these roles is very interesting and important, and having these discussions that will continue to talk around the importance of why women should also explore roles that are normally seen as male-dominated sector is important. Thank you very much, Amaomi, for that beautiful presentation. I'll come back to you, Ruth Sunday, with a follow-on question. And my question is, your work is focused on promoting access to quality innovation and digital education, like you mentioned to us earlier. Can you share more about the gendered nature of access to digital education and your work in addressing this? Over.
All right. Thank you so much, Tolu, for this question. I think this is going to be like a follow-up from what I said earlier. The reason why I opted into work especially in the field of creating access to quality, innovative, and digital education was because of my experience. I think most of the work I do in the development space was actually inspired by my experience. Well, because of the fact that I grew up in a village, and in as much as I see that even people who live in towns and cities now, there's this wide range of gender gap when it comes to access to quality, innovative, and digital education. And so far, we have been able to train over 100 plus girls in digital trainings. We've empowered women in order to be able to reduce the gender gap to some large extent within the space in which I work. The reason why I feel access was the major problem was because it's not as if people have not heard about these things. It's not as if women or young girls doesn't know that some of these things exist. But knowledge alone is not enough, right? If I know that I need to learn cybersecurity, for instance, there's something called cybersecurity. I've heard someone mention this before, but where can I learn? Access has been the major problem when it comes to bridging the gender gap or bridging the gap that is existing in the world of science and technology. And so for what we have been able to do is to create a platform that gives young women access to learning environment. And that platform is what we call the STEM Hub. It's located in Jos. And what our STEM Hub does is we bring in girls from different communities and train them on digital skills and how they can use the day-to-day access to the internet in order to live and become better. And some of the young women that have undergone our trainings had opportunities to intern with organizations, and at the end of the day, they are leveraging technology in order to make their lives better, regardless of whichever field they have decided to go into. So for me, what I think most times is that we need to create access. Access is always my watchword. Let there be access to some of these opportunities, and then the women decide not to take advantage of it, than to have people who are willing to learn, but they don't have access to this learning environment. So far, what we have been able to do over the years is to create this access. Because what I discovered is that a lot of people lack information. And why this gap keeps widening is because there is no proper information, there's no proper knowledge, there's no proper enlightenment on how some of these skills can be acquired. So if you feel this skill is, or feel the knowledge is very far from you, making attempts to even have access to them is going to be very difficult. So what we are doing is to bring the learning platform close to the people that feel they can have access to these learning platforms, and then empower them with the skills and let them go and explore. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth Key. I would like to commend you on the amazing work you are doing in bridging the gap to accessing digital knowledge, especially knowing that your institution or organization is located in the northern part of the country. It's really exciting to hear how much you are pushing for girls to bridge the gap within digital technology space. So well done. I heard something that stood out for me, and which is access. A lot of times within gender issues, we see that when opportunities or access are not equal for both boys and girls, then it becomes a challenge for some of our girl children to even venture into specific spaces. So that really stood out for me, the issue of access, and just to still commend what you are doing in Plateau State. Thank you very much, Ruth Key. I would like to come back to you, Omaomi. And my question for you, my next question for you is, beyond your innovation, how can you use technology as an organization to combat GBV and bridge the inequality gap? Ruth just gave us a brief overview of how her organization is, the efforts that our organizations are putting to bridge that technology gap. I'd like you to address that question as well as gender mobile. I know you spoke a lot about some of the innovations and some of the, you know, what your organization is doing, but specifically as it relates to bridging the gender gap for girls on innovation. Can you run us through what Gender Mobile is doing in that aspect? Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Susan. Regarding the question, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Yeah. So, I mean, speaking to the question that you asked about, you know, beyond what Gender Mobile is doing, how can technology be leveraged to, you know, combat gender-based violence and also bridge the inequality gap? And I think I'm going to be speaking a lot about access also, which Ruth had already, you know, set the tone for. But I think before also talking about access, I'm also going to talk about other ways that, you know, other organizations and even government is leveraging technology in a way that is quite innovative. And that's outside what we even do at Gender Mobile. We talk about complementarity, we talk about collaboration. And I think we all know that this is the new oil. And as such, for organizations that are even already leveraging technology, we also need to think about newer ways of doing this and how we can work with others who are also exploring other forms of technology to address sexual and gender-based violence, and also to bridge the, you know, inequality gap. So I will start off by saying that yes, technology has been largely deployed, like you did say, to address a lot of social problems. But some of these also have not been, some of this adoption of technology have not been successful, while some have been successful. But in general, technology actually offers a great opportunity for improving, you know, access to services, for improving the response of GBV legal service, and even in terms of, you know, adopting an open source technology for gender-based violence management, case management. And I think an organization in Abuja is really doing great with that. I think that, is it Takumi Foundation? Because I recall that during CSW, they had actually made a presentation on what they were, you know, doing regarding virtual case management. That for me was quite profound, because a lot of times when we think about virtual case management, we also think about 1,001 ways that will probably not work. So it's really good to see that we have an organization doing that. And I think there are also other ways, you know, that we can leverage digital technology in terms of even capturing court admissible forensic evidence from survivors of sexual violence. In some sense, we all need technology. A lot of times when cases are reported, the first thing some people ask for is evidence. And when you find out ways people document evidence, you'd see that they probably need some electronic device, you know, to be able to store this evidence and preserve it. And another way is that technology can also raise awareness, educate the public, and provide, you know, essential gender-based violence information. And I think that in some sense, people are even using gaming. I mean, that might sound unconventional, but that's also an interesting way, you know, of creating awareness on sexual and gender-based violence, and also bridging the inequality gap. And we're talking about inequality gap when women find themselves in spaces where they are, you know, constantly subjected to patterns of sexual violence, which impact or impairs their voice, their agency. Whether we like it or not, that's a form of widening the inequality gap, because it affects their agency, it affects their bodily autonomy. They are not able to take decisions. They don't have control over resources. So that way, the inequality gap continues to widen, because they are, you know, persistently being disempowered by virtue of a couple of things. So I was talking about leveraging games, you know, in a way that is quite unconventional, which is also quite innovative. I know the video games have a history of promoting misogyny and violence, but we can also create, you know, computer and mobile games that are created or designed to educate players about GBV or to even start conversations about GBV. And a great example is an interactive game from Facebook called Anna. I don't know if we are familiar with that game, but it's some game that I'm quite familiar with, where the gamer uses tools to assist Anna, who was, in that game, a victim of domestic violence. Now, anyone who is familiar with that probably understand what domestic violence means and how you could provide support to a victim of domestic violence when you find one. Another way that, technology can also be largely deployed beyond what we're doing at Gender Mobile is to provide vital training and knowledge exchange for staff supporting, for staff that are supporting people, who experience sexual and gender-based violence. And even for staff to understand what sexual and gender-based violence means, sexual harassment in the workplace. I know that in more evolved countries like in the US, in Germany, and in the UK, when people are onboarding staff in organizations, they ensure that they undertake an onboarding process that gets them exposed to a lot of learnings around this. And they leverage technology to do this because the world is evolving and we have to keep thinking about ways of leveraging technology. Again, I always like to say that technology should never be a substitute, right? Rather, it should always be a complement. It doesn't mean that we should relegate our ways of doing things because we also need to understand that technology also has its own limitations. Unfortunately, we talk about technology a lot as if there are no lows or downsides to technology. And this also means that when we're designing technology tools, we also need to think about ways to mitigate the risk or the hazards that, technology in itself could pose to people, to potential users or actual users of technology. So I think I'll stop there now, for now.
Thank you very much, Omaomi, for creating more, for actually lay more emphasis on the need for access. But there's something that you said that also is very important, and that's collaboration. Especially as within the innovation space, we do not see a lot of women. So I'm happy today we have two key players within the space. And I think that if we could just collaborate more on ensuring that our girl children see this space as very attractive, and then we can begin to bridge that gender gap that we see currently within that space. So thank you very much, Omaomi. That's was very insightful. I'd like to come back to you, Ruth. I'll ask you two more questions, then I'm sure my audience are itching to also ask the panel some questions. So I'm going to ask you one more question, Ruth, and I'll probably open it up to our virtual participants to also come into the discussion. So Ruth Key, the current gender reality of the digital divide is quite disturbing, as you may have seen, and requires a holistic and concerted approach. What do you think the role of state and non-state actors are in closing the existing gender digital gap? I know you've spoken a lot about CSO's activity and efforts in this, but specifically government, what do you think their role are currently or should be in closing this gender digital gap that we see exist today? Ruth, over.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan, for the question. I know that it's going to be very difficult to close the gender gap that is existing completely, but then if all hands will be on deck, I believe that the level will be reduced to some large extent. And in as much as non-governmental organizations have been doing quite a number of things like what my co-presenter Omaomi talked about, we all need to take responsibility to ensure that the gender gap is reduced. And before I'll talk about the role that governments can play, I want to first of all talk about what we as women who are already on this space can actually do to help reduce the rate of the gender gap that is existing. And some of the things I have identified as the factors that led to the wide gender gap that we have currently include things around culture and then power dynamics that we've talked about already, and lack of mentorship that is already in the space. So if women who are already on this space can take the responsibility to bring one woman in, or just letting your light shine in your space so that you can allow other women coming behind you to shine, it can actually go a long way in bridging the gap. So there are a lot of policies that are already in existence now that is helping to reduce this gender gap that is existing. And these policies are government policies, others are individual private sector policies, especially when it comes to recruitment and other things that create gender barriers or gender biases in the workspace, especially in the tech space.
Oh, okay. Are you done? Or I think that's
so. If we need to bridge this, okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry, we lost you a bit. Are you done, or you were trying to make some closing statements? Okay, thank you very much, Ruth. Apologies. It looked like you had some, network challenges, but I could hear you very clearly. And indeed, I like what you said about some of the efforts government is putting in terms of this area. And one, of course, one of the key efforts by government we see is policies. So just hearing from you that there are key policies that government have put in place to ensure that such gaps are closed, it's very comforting. And of course, we know that within the gender equality space that indeed the government have made some effort, and civil society actors continue to push for efforts to make it even better. I know we are currently, civil society actors are pushing for the GOB bill that a lot of women-focused CSOs have been working on for some years now. So yes, indeed, government has a role to play. And we as actors within the space will continue to work with government and push them to take those actions. I'll come back to you, Omaomi, with one last question, and then I open it up to the audience to join the discussion. So Omaomi, innovation approaches and technology adoption are not usually as seamless as we see or as they sound. What challenges have you encountered as Gender Mobile Initiative, and how have you overcome or intend to overcome those challenges? Over.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. It's good that when we talk about the really great advantages of technology, we also need to acknowledge, the drawbacks. That's very important. Yeah. It looks really great to be leveraging technology, but of course there are challenges in terms of access. I would say again that in spaces of learning where we're leveraging technology in form of a mobile app to see that people are able to build their voice, their agency, and access support that they really desire, that they truly desire. A lot of times people do not have access to internet, and that in itself is quite problematic. And because when people do not have access to internet, whether you like it or not, that's a form of exclusion. So it's really important that in the course of programming, we also try to understand how best people can access this in a way that in the course of trying to promote access, you're not indirectly excluding a particular group of people because they do not have access to resources or because they are from low resource background, knowing fully well that these people could even be also disproportionately affected by sexual and gender-based violence. The other bit, the challenge that I see that we've experienced, which we were able to also go back to the drawing board, and I would say we fail forward on this, like I always say, was at the point where we were sort of, designing a technology platform, we didn't do as much community engagement as we should have done. And that's where the whole issue about, also designing feminist technologies in a way that people who experience this social injustice are at the center of the design. You have to design it with them as equal partners. And that's the only way you can center their experiences. I think we'd actually be deceiving ourselves if we design technology in a way where we're just handing it over to a community more like they are sole beneficiaries, like we're doing them a favor. That way, it's not going to achieve the aim that it should achieve. So there was a time in our life as an organization where we had designed a mobile app for campus communities, but we didn't do as much engagement as we should have done. And when we deployed this technology, there was a bit of pushback. The adoption rate was really low, and we had to go back to the drawing board. We saw that at that point, campus communities needed the bit of feature where we had to, have the matching folder, information escrow, where people want to report and they're scared of coming out to speak out. But when they see that someone else had reported that same person, it matches them. And then, they build up the confidence to report this case against the perpetrator. We also realized that new students who were coming on board were very vulnerable to sexual harassment because there was no platform to access onboarding information. We know how, is the October rush, they call it, on campus communities, where new students are just coming in. They don't have access to information on accommodation. They don't know how to navigate their way around campus. And they meet a staylight who is willing to help, offers them a room for free. And then before you know it, they start cohabiting, and one thing leads to another in the course of, providing support to a new student. So we realized that students in campus communities really wanted a platform where they could access information in a way that is transparent and they're not exposed to any form of risk. The other bit also is we realized that people needed a platform where they could have information exchange. We saw that didn't exist in the initial design that we had. So we had to go back to the drawing board, infused all these features. And at that point, we're confident that, that we had a technology device or a technology tool that was a product of community engagement. So we were able to address that because at that point, they became an equal partner to Gender Mobile in the course of design. And I'm glad to share that one of the greatest outcomes that we've achieved from that is that campus communities are now owning it because it is theirs. First off, it wasn't made for Gender Mobile, and it was not supposed to be made by Gender Mobile. So it was supposed to be made by the community and for the community. So that's something that, we need to put in mind when we are leveraging technology to see that it truly supports the community, or it truly serves the community that it's meant to serve. So overall, I would say again that technology has posed a lot of risk, but we also need to think about overlapping issues, ethical considerations of data, ethical consideration of consent, ethical consideration of privacy. We're collecting data a lot with this technology too, but the question is, what are we using the data we're collecting for? How are we managing the data? How are we storing this data? Are we storing it in a way that is inimical to the interest of people who have this data? Are we doing it in a way that is colonized, that we're collecting data from people and we're like, oh, we're using it for your benefit without getting their consent to actually use the data for the purpose that we're using it for? So we need to think about broader issues around, privacy, around consent, around data sharing, in a way that people feel safe to come forward, share their details on this platform, and also even provide consent for the data to be used for better programming and policy response. And I think the other bit of also making the spaces safe, I would say is as CSOs also, we could advocate for safety measures to be infused in some of the platforms that we find ourselves on most of the time. So for example, Facebook would say they have a safety measure, but how effective is the safety measure? So if you're on a platform, for example, and you're typing any related word that implies danger, there could be like an activation of, a particular feature where your community is, informed that you're probably in danger or you're currently exposed to danger. I think there's actually a mobile app that serves that purpose. It's called Circle of Six, and I think it's in the US. Again, this app helps to build community such that when you're in danger, it alerts everyone around you. And those are ways that we can actually really make, some of these technology platforms really safe for people who are using it, and particularly women and girls.
Thank you very much, Amaomi, for that insight. I think you actually emphasize and threw more light on issues, on some of the challenges that we experience within the online world or within the technological, platforms. And one thing that you said that was very important is the issue of access, actually. Access challenge is the challenge of access could be a problem, especially for communities that do not have access to stable internet and all of that. And there's something else that you said that is very important. Community engagement for sustainability is key. For every time that you want to engage some of these people, you gave an example of Gender Mobile project on the campus community and how it was able to engage. And because the community was taking the lead, it has continued to become sustainable. So I think that was very important. And that stood out very well alongside issues of privacy, consent, and data protection, which are all important areas that we should all keep an eye on, especially within the data innovation platforms and world. Thank you so much for that. At this junction, I would like to open it up for conversation and questions that may be coming up from our virtual participants. May I request that you could kindly either raise your hands if you want to ask a question or make a contribution, or you can decide to type it into the chat box and I would read it out for those of you that may not want to speak. So it is open now to discussions. And I can see one hand up already. So I'm going to give to Kwasi Ketiaji the floor to ask her question or make her contribution. So Kwasi, you have the floor. Over. We cannot hear you, Topasi. Are you speaking?
Still not audible.
Okay. Any more audience member that would like to make a contribution or ask a question, please, this is the opportunity to engage with our speakers. Okay, so if we don't have any questions or contributions at this junction, okay, there's a question coming in. This is from Sarah Ego. Sarah says, how can we better engage men and boys? Let me direct this question to Ruth. And then Gender Mobile can also, you can also share your insight on this question. But let's go with Ruth first. Ruth, over.
Okay. She's actually asking how we can better engage boys and men, okay, in driving technology to address GBV. Okay, most times I tell people that the quest for gender equality is not a fight against men. It's not a fight for an equality with men, but it is mostly a fight for an equitable environment where everyone, regardless of gender, can actually thrive in whatever field without questions of where you are coming from, without questions of whether you are a man, a woman, a boy, or a girl. And if we want to drive this conversation, it's very important to have the men at the center of this conversation, because they will understand better when you help them see the need to engage in this conversation in order to bridge the gender gap. And we can actually engage them better when we bring them on board for the conversation. So if we keep doing women thing without involving the men, they will feel they are not part of the conversation. But if we bring them on board to have this conversation with them, it's actually a better way to engage them. And then you want them to own the conversation. If we discover that one of the challenge is the fact that we have men who suppress women in workplace, and you are having these men at the center of the conversation, it's going to be very easier for us to tackle the challenge than just having the conversation with women. So bringing them on board to have this conversation is going to be a better way to engage them.
Thank you, Ruth. I think that's very important. Male engagement is key, especially to have better developmental outcomes. So thank you so much for emphasizing on the importance of bringing men and boys into the discussion. I think that has addressed that question very nicely. We have another question from Tokwase. I think she struggled to speak earlier, but she has now typed her question. I would direct this question to Omaomi, and if Ruth has some response, you can speak after Omaomi as well. So Omaomi, Tokwasi says, thank you for the presentations. My question is, how does your organization respond to cases of SGBV if reported? Over.
Thank you very much, Topase. I hope I didn't murder that name for that question. So when cases of sexual and gender-based violence are reported to the organization, we take it up promptly. And again, it depends on the nature of case that is, reported to the organization. So when cases are reported that requires that we refer such case, for example, some cases are reported, cases of rape, and we refer them to the Sexual Assault Referral Center. Within the area that such case has happened. For example, we're headquartered in Abuja, and we have a fully operational office in Ekiti State. And in these spaces where we have physical presence, we work closely with critical stakeholders, and we provide, the necessary referral pathway to see that such cases are well managed. And when we refer these cases to the Sexual Assault Referral Center, we also ensure that we follow through to see that, the person also gets justice. But most importantly, when cases are reported, we try to understand what the survivor wants. If it's a case that's been reported by a victim or a survivor, as the case may be, and it could be a bystander, because we see that a lot of cases are also reported by bystanders. But when it's a survivor that reports, it's important that you seek the consent of the survivor. And when we talk about survivor-centered approach, it has to do with understanding or prioritizing the needs of that survivor. Some people come to report cases and they just tell you that, look, what I just want is counseling and maybe some support to help me relocate from the premises or from the environment where I'm currently being abused. You need to respect, the decision or the aspiration of such person in terms of what justice means for that person at that time. If it's someone who says, you know what, I want this taken up, I actually want to institute a legal action against this person, we also provide the necessary support. If it's a case of rape, we all know that it's a crime against the state. And what this means is that the police has to prosecute. Of course, the Ministry of Justice has to issue legal advice, and then the case has to be, further prosecuted. And that way we can watch brief in such case to see that the victim or the survivor, as the case may be, is undergoing the best treatment while that case is ongoing. We know that when people have to come to court to recount gory experiences of sexual harassment or sexual violence, as the case may be, it could be traumatizing for such victim. So we ensure that, we provide them the necessary support all through that phase. If it's a case of sexual harassment that was reported in an environment of learning, the approach is usually quite different. Yes, we prioritize the interest of the person reporting also to see that perhaps we could evacuate such person from the space where the person might be threatened physically, like if the person's physical security is coming under serious threat, in a space that is again characterized by power differentials. In that manner, we provide such support. We then work with the institution. If it's an institution that we're in partnership with, we work with them as an accountability partner to see that such case is, well addressed. And it starts from the person, given an opportunity to be fairly heard in an atmosphere that is very friendly and not hostile. In schools where we do not have a partnership with them, we explore other options, because we know that sexual harassment has a reputation dimension to it. And if you're coming as an external party to fight the school, there could be some backlashes. So, and that's where the whole conversation around strategic engagement and strategic litigation actually starts. You'd recall that the OAU case that was prosecuted, where we had Professor Akindele eventually convicted, was strategically litigated. The ICPC had to step into the matter, and that's where we also all need to collaborate to see, when cases like this come up, how can we work together to see that we put our best foot forward, especially when what justice means to the survivor in this case is more around sanctioning the perpetrator beyond administrative sanction now, but proper legal sanction, which can only be given or declared or issued by a competent court of jurisdiction. So a competent court of law, rather. So when we think holistically, about these cases, there is no one size that fits all. Also, because people have different experiences of sexual harassment, sexual violence, and their priorities are also different. So what applies to survivor A might not apply to survivor B. So there's no template, for, addressing these cases. And I would say again that it's a learning curve for us. So because some cases really differ from other cases, sometimes we also learn along the line, and we also check notes with partner organizations. And this is something that happens a lot within the space when we come across cases that are quite, dicey.
Thank you, Omaomi. I think I picked on the last point you talked about, collaboration and referral when it comes to cases of harassment and all of that. And also basically emphasizing on the survivor-centered approach was something very interesting. Thank you for your response. Before I go back to our comments and questions in the comment box, I think I saw Evelyn Oluchukwu raise her hand for quite a while. Evelyn, do you still have a question you would like to ask our speakers before I go back to the chat box?
All right, yes, it's a contribution on my side, really. And it's quite noisy here, so if it gets too noisy, just let me know and I'll just wrap it up. Now, I want to make this contribution towards the question you asked to the second speaker about access to technology, where you said what should state partners to state institutions and non-state do in the areas of increasing access to technology. And here I would like to add that something that I really think we should have our eyes on too. We'll be talking about the educational institutions and the institutions of higher learning. And when it comes to when it comes to bringing in women into technology, I believe that we should actually have a situation where it's more or less like a quota thing, like a certain percentage of those admitted to study computer science and all the other tech courses should actually be set aside for women. Because in most cases, yeah, it's always a level playing ground, but it's not always a level playing ground. So once you just once you keep an open mind, at the end of the day, you see that most of the most of the people that will be coming in, most of the students that will be coming in, the freshers coming in to study science and technology courses will definitely be males, will definitely be all men, and at the end of the day, we will find ourselves facing the same thing we've always faced, and and we will still end up saying that they're back in male-dominated sector. So yeah, I believe strongly that we're looking at how we can think more of our learning institutions to keep a particular percentage. 50% is good for a start. So if we're making sure that, because I study computer science, and I always say it's so funny and it's hard to believe that in my course I was the only woman and studying computer science in that year. I was the first. Computer science was just introduced into that institution, and I was like in the first batch. And funny enough, I was the only woman studying computer science at that year. And I believe if we make it compulsory, like, okay, it's not like maybe I was the only person who wanted to get into. Some people were. Maybe it just was too complicated. So if we have our eyes on, institutions of learning and how to make sure it's like a policy saying that 50% of the new intake for STEM courses are definitely women. But on the 1st of May, we will be starting one of our projects, which we call Due Path, which is a path to development and economic growth, and we're looking at, and what we're doing with that program really will be to bring in core science and core computing courses to to young graduates who are trying to transition to tech. And what we're doing really is the same quarter thing I talked about. So instead of like opening up because anybody who can pay, anybody who wants to pay, just register. No, we decided that what we're doing was to actually make it a quarter thing. So everybody drop your application and then select it.
Okay.
How you're balancing.
Mute your mic.
Okay.
All right. So
okay.
So we can know how we're. Yeah, I got that. So we can definitely be deliberate and intentional about how we're balancing the sexes. And then there's one issue that we've really been talking about for.
I think we have lost you a bit, but thank you so much, Evelyn. I think those were some very interesting insights into some of the efforts that you personally, as an actor within the space, some of the efforts you've put in to ensure that women and girls are properly engaged on the digital space. Thank you so much for that comment, that addition, and just giving us a breakdown on what you are doing within that space. Thank you so much, Evelyn. I'll come back to the question in the chat box. This is from Comfort. She says, in the absence of no electronic device to record evidence during a case or an abuse, what other ways can a survivor get or keep evidence that will be acceptable when seeking help, either online or one-on-one? I think I would direct this question to Omaomi. Omaomi, can you respond to this? And then Ruth can take the next question. Yes, go ahead, please.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, evidence is evidence. It's quite unfortunate that a lot of times, even when there is still evidence, the evidence is still further interrogated. So how much more when people do not have evidence. And I would say over and over again that one evidence that has really worked is electronic evidence. Even with that, people still try to find out if it's not doctored, if it's not framed, because a lot of times it's always everyone against the survivor. People have to question. Of course, we all know the culture of victim blaming. What is she doing there? What were you wearing? Why were you hanging out with a guy, or why were you in the lecturer's office, and the likes. So, but also in cases of maybe domestic violence, of course, if there are actually bruises that's on your body, and you can show that it's as a result of the domestic violence, even if there is no electronically generated evidence, that would also suffice. There was a rape case that we had actually handled as an organization that lingered on, even at the level of the police station for like 6 months. And I recall that on 3 occasions, our first 3 visits to the police station, the girl, the victim, as the case may be, had a clothes on those 3 occasions. And the Nigerian police was even still questioning, oh, you were raped and your clothes are not rumpled. You were raped. And on the first day of visit, which was when it happened, our powder was quite intact. They were asking us sort of damning questions that at that point, the survivor herself felt dejected and felt that there was no way she was going to move ahead on that case. We had to sort of placate her and appeal to her that we were going to stay by her and provide her with the necessary support. So it is what it is. We always encourage people. And now that even people are, generating evidence electronically, perpetrators are also going ahead of people that are using that device to find other ways through which, such would not even work. And that's why, in terms of our approach, we also have to, ensure that we are pragmatic, to be sure that we are steps ahead of the perpetrator. Because as these issues are evolving, approaches are evolving, and perpetrators too are evolving in their approach of perpetrating violence, whether offline or online. So for me, I would say generating evidence electronically is actually a very good way to store evidence and preserve evidence. And that's why when these cases happen, we encourage victims to immediately send it to us, because they may lose their phone in the process. And once you lose your phone or you lose that data on your chat page, that could also be problematic. We've had cases where initially the perpetrator actually admitted to committing the crime. The moment he saw that there was no longer evidence, he then pleaded not guilty. So, and, we were then back to square zero, at the time. So I would always encourage people, if there are alternative ways of generating evidence, why not? But this is one way that we know that at least it can't be interrogated to the point where such evidence would not be admissible.
Thank you so much. Nicely presented. Thank you, Omaomi. I think we just have additional comments. Then I will let you have your 1-minute closing statement. This is from Sarah. Sarah says, thank you, Ruth and Omaomi, for the highly insightful contributions. Also, thanks, Ruth, for the response to my question. Indeed, we need to include our males in our interventions as allies. Yes, very important, male engagement. This is from Tokwasi. Tokwasi says, thank you, Omaomi. I would like to add that your organization should also partner with NAPTIP, as the VAP law is domiciled with them in the FCT. Thank you for pointing us in that direction, Tokwasi. Thank you so much for the active participation. I would let our speakers, starting from Ruth, to give us their 1-minute closing statements. Ruth, and then Omaomi, and then we can just close the session for today. Thank you so much, Ruth. Over to you. You have 1 minute to give us your closing statements as we wrap up this webinar. Over.
Okay, thank you very much for the privilege to speak. I think if there's actually anything that has done women well globally, is the coming of some of these innovation and technology. Because what technology has helped us to do is to provide equal access to knowledge, equal access to learning platforms, equal access to training opportunities. It has given us access to acquire new skills that are necessary to compete in the workspace. Technology has also helped us to eliminate biases when it comes to recruitment processes and a lot of other things that it was extremely difficult for women to have access to. We can also see that technology has provided a very flexible arrangement that accommodates caregiving responsibilities for women. So technology has also helped in addressing gender-based violence issues, like Omawomi has said, how far they have gone using leveraging technology to solve issues relating to gender-based violence. And overall, I want to say that leveraging technology and innovation can lead to a more equitable and gender-balanced world. So as young women, we need to embrace technology and take advantage of it as much as we can, because it's a step towards creating an equal world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Well said. Thank you so much for your amazing contribution and for that very insightful closing statement. Over to you, Omaomi. 1 minute, can we have your closing statement as well? Over.
Thank you very much, Susan. Thank you very much for, having me over to, share more about the work that we do at Gender Mobile, leveraging technology to advance gender equality and to combat sexual and gender-based violence. I think I would close by saying that I'd mentioned earlier that the new currency is collaboration, and we all have a role to play in promoting effective use of technology to combat sexual and gender-based violence. And I think I'm just going to wrap up by saying that technology is not the sole solution that we have, right? We need to know that, but it has the power to change the reality of what is possible. Ruth had, provided some context by saying that technology has further enabled equal access to services, to information, but as a collective and as individuals, how are we ensuring that technologies that people are accessing are safe for women and girls? We all have a role to play, and we all have to ensure that the spaces where we occupy, to see that we further enhance access to these technologies as spaces that we keep safe as individuals, as civil society organizations, and as state actors. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. We have a closing statement too from someone in-house that wants to quickly say something. Over, Laz.
Thank you all very much. I'm Laz Api, the advocacy manager on the Scale project. And I just wanted to say thank you all in solidarity and urge you on. You have a lot of allies in some of us here in the room. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you so much to our amazing online participants. It was very insightful, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much to our very vast and experienced speakers, Maomi and Ruth. Thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge and expertise with us this afternoon. And thank you to everyone that made out time to join us to mark Women's Day today. Just to, continue to encourage us to keep the discussion going and in everything that we do, especially as it relates to this year's theme, to encourage women and girls to participate more within the innovative and technological world, as the case may be. So thank you so much all for being partners to the Scale project and being part of our discussion. I wish you all an amazing day, and we hope to engage with you more on other platforms and on other days. Have a great day, and thank you. And with me here, I have our amazing Scale team. It would be nice to put the faces to the great team members that do the work behind camera. Scale.
Yeah,
Scale.
Thank you, everyone.
Well done, Scale.
Thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Maxwell. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy Women's Day and Happy Women's Month. Keep doing your best. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.